Welcome back to the channel, Phoenixes. Today we're going to go ahead and be discussing the story time of when my husband got snubbed by a supervisor and got humbled for it. So I want to preface this video by stating that this is my husband's story that he has given me permission to tell. I have done my best to recall it. I've worked with him this week to map out the finer details of the story. It's not going to be a long one, but I hope to be as accurate as I possibly can be. So just sit back, relax, and let's just get right into it. So, this story is based in the summer of 2021. So, as you all know, that was high time for the vid that was going around. My husband actually had just returned back to his respective shop from being at home or working from home, basically. And after he got back to the shop, he was put up for an award of sorts. He was the only one that was originally going to be put up for this award, but the supervisor in question decided to persuade the higher ups that were going to be in charge of judging for the award. He had chosen to add another candidate, to have them deliberate in between my husband and that person. So that person ended up winning the said award based on that. And my husband felt a bit slighted, not from the individual that won, because he felt like that person was fit to win the award and that they were a stand-up guy, and he felt like they were, cool peoples pretty much. But he felt a type of way towards the supervisor because they had a not so good work relationship. The supervisor, I guess, had been a little nasty with him on various other occasions, and as well as his other coworkers. Like I said, this was a supervisor that really wasn't well liked. I know in this shop in particular, my husband was working with a lot of retired military individuals who, you could consider were old heads. They're a lot older gentlemen who had, of course, served their country in their time, and they were just, really um they sounded like really cool people to hang out. I know my husband, he always would say that that was one of his best commands that he's ever been at, and one of his best experiences, and a lot of that he attributed to working with those veterans. And I know in particular that they really took a shine to my husband, and that they would oftentimes dote on him a lot. And I'm not exactly sure if that's why him and the supervisor may not have gotten along, because no one, including the veterans, really cared for him. They, just no one really liked him. Anyway, after the award ceremony had taken place, I'd say about a month later, the same supervisor ended up blowing out the tendons in his foot and his ankle at a baseball game. So the team that he played on was, of course, for the military. And one of my husband's fellow coworkers, who also played on the same team, actually witnessed the supervisor get injured. And the way that it was explained to my husband was essentially that the supervisor was getting ready to either take base or run from the base, and his foot and his ankle just completely just blew out. And ambulance had to be called. He had to be taken to the hospital, and I think he had to end up getting like surgery or something like that, to that degree. Like, that's how bad it was. It was just, it seemed like such a fluke incident. But my husband took it to mean that, that was God basically humbling his adversary. And the reason he felt that way is because, like I said, this man, I guess, had been, nasty to him on many other occasions, like also questioning his work ethic and, just not necessarily being kind to him on most of the occasions that they would interact. And from his account, a lot of his other coworkers felt the same, like they just didn't have good experiences with this particular supervisor. So he felt like, I guess God had come to his aid and his defense. And I will chime in and say that recalling these conversations that I would have with him after he would come home and, tell me these things, I really was just kind of personally blown away, because it's not the first time that my husband has had someone, at work that didn't like him or didn't care for him, and that he's been able to see their karma dealt out to them in real time. So, I of course wasn't expecting to hear the news of how the supervisor got injured, but it definitely didn't surprise me that something did end up happening. And that's just seemed to be a common theme for my husband, and not, and my family as well, that we've noticed that when certain individuals have done us wrong or try to do us wrong, like eventually stuff catches up with them. My husband tends to get to see, I guess, snippets of that more so than I do, or I feel like, or I have in my life. But at the same time, I don't necessarily look for it. And I'm not saying that he does too, but it just, I don't know. It's one of those like supernatural things where I feel like he always is kind of like in the right place at the right time. And in this case, his coworker was at the right place at the right time and literally brought that information back to the shop that day, and told him specifically. And, my husband, kind of was like, wow, like, see, that's what happens when you mess with a child of God, so to speak. Or at least that's how we are identifying ourselves at the time, because we were still in the process of shedding our old religion, I shall say, which was Christianity. But we, of course, now we're both more so spiritualists. But at the time, we, were, or at least myself, trying to work on being more holy and all that jazz, and everything that comes with that sort of stuff. But this was just like, this was one for the record books, and that's another reason why I feel like it was necessary to include it in this series. Just because I promise you, I couldn't make this stuff up if I tried. And I told you guys in the last video that, I don't know what it is, but when it comes to my family, like, people try to be nasty or whatever, like, stuff gets done. And it's not even by our hand. Like, my family and I have never raised our hand to, exact vengeance against anyone. I'm not going to sit here and lie and say, oh, we haven't thought about it. But but we've never acted on any impulses that we may have ever had. And yet these people still end up getting dealt with. And it just goes to show you that you really need to be careful as just a decent person, just to not mishandle people, because you don't know who you're fooling with. There are some people roaming this planet that are protected by the Most High, who he has set aside, who he has deemed his favorites, who he has deemed his chosen. So, when you coming at people that you might think is meek and mild and an easy pickings, so to speak, you better think twice, because you don't ever know who you're fooling with. And like I said, this wasn't a case where my husband did anything or said anything. This was news that came back to him. He wasn't even looking for this information. He didn't ask about this information. that coworker had it in his heart to come back and share that information. So if he would have never said anything, my husband wouldn't have known anything. But needless to say, the supervisor had to get removed from the shop because he was placed on what they would call like limited duty, and he wouldn't have been able to do his, I guess his job in the capacity he needed to with the injury that he had sustained. So he basically was removed completely out of the shop. He was no longer over my husband and his coworkers, and someone else had to take his place. And that was the silver lining in all of that. Not necessarily so much the man, ankle getting blown out or whatever, but the fact that he ended up getting removed. And my husband just really was so happy about that, because he's like, now I can continue to do my job and not feel like I got someone, that's, essentially trying to stab me in the back and, undercut all of my hard work. And I, of course, being the wife that I am to him, I've always told him, like, hey, we don't wish no bad anything on anybody. But at the end of the day, you know, people always get what they put out. You reap what you sow. And this is just another prime example of that. And it's also a testament to the divine intervention that we believe was proceeded on his behalf, as well as others that have been wronged by this individual in the shop. Because even to current times, my husband has been able to meet completely new coworkers that he's never worked with a day in his life, who also knew of the supervisor, whom they've told him also, were where he wasn't kind to them, or that he undercutted them, or in some way, shape, or form. So clearly, this is a person who was maybe throwing his weight around a little bit with his title or whatever, because I know that does happen. Some people get a little bit of power and it goes to their head. But like I said, clearly this was someone who just was not a kind person, and maybe it was just his time to reap what he sowed. But I'm gonna let y'all be the judge on that, because there's no way for me to 100% know. I can have my thoughts and feelings about it, but I don't know 100%. But I still felt like it was worth sharing this story, because I feel like there's others out there who can probably relate, and or who might even have, some even wilder stories than what I presented to you today. But I want to give a shout out to my husband and thank him for allowing me to share this story on his behalf. And clearly not mentioning any body's names or anything like that, just because, again, we still want to keep it respectful and humble, because it's not about trying to tear down that person or whatever, but just telling my husband's account. And unfortunately, there's no way for me to do that without mentioning the opposition in the story. But again, I'm trying to do my best to make sure I protect people's privacy and stuff like that too. So, to anyone listening, if you knew and or know my husband, and you experienced, this, or you were there to experience this story, or to see that, hey, who it was and what it was, and you probably know it better than I do. But just understand that it's not to shame or anything like that. I'm sharing this story to bring a testament to how I feel my family, and in this case my husband, was divinely protected. Because again, there are times where our names and mentions of us are being mentioned in rooms that we've never set foot in. So God may have overheard conversations that my husband didn't hear. So that I'm just going to leave it like that. But I hope you guys enjoyed the story. I know it was a brief one, because it took place a while ago, and there really was no more to it than that. After the supervisor got removed, everything was back smooth sailing for my husband. So, and essentially it didn't stop anything for him. It may have delayed, some things, but it didn't stop anything. He's definitely made up for that, encounter 10 times over now. So, my husband, he's an awesome dude. I'm not saying, I know he's not perfect, but at the end of the day, he's a stand-up guy. Like he tries to do right by folks. He tries to be cordial with folks, and I'm sure, shoot, there might be somebody that got a story about him. So, again, that's just how humble we are. We recognize not everybody get along and click and stuff, and it's bound to happen. Like we're people. We all have different personalities, and sometimes they don't mesh, and that's fine. But I really did feel like this was a good one to share. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. But, I want you guys to put down in the comments what you thought about this story, or if you have one of your own to share, please feel free to share it, because you never know how it might help someone else. And or at the very least, we can get a good chuckle along with you with the story. Or, if you can tell us how you were able to triumph over one of your adversaries by divine intervention. Shoot, that I'd love to see something like that. But I'm gonna go ahead and head out. And until next time, see ya.